You ever had one of those moments where your whole life turns upside down in the blink of an eye? 1 second, you're just living, working, doing what you're supposed to do, and the next, you're sitting in a police station, handcuffed, trying to convince people you didn't do something you'd never even think of doing. That was me. My name's Jordan Carter. I was 23 years old, a law student, and working part-time at Grayson's Diner, one of those old-school, family-owned fast food joints where the grease never really leaves your clothes, and the smell of fried chicken sticks to your skin no matter how many showers you take. It wasn't glamorous, but it helped pay the bills. Plus, I liked the people. Well, most of them. The one person I didn't like? Mark Sullivan, my manager. Something about him always rubbed me the wrong way. He was in his 40s, balding, always had the smug grin like he was 2 steps ahead of everyone else. He never missed a chance to remind me that I was just an employee and he was the boss. I could feel it in the way he spoke to me, like he was waiting for me to mess up. Turns out, I didn't need to. He took care of that for me. It was a Friday night, busy as hell. Orders flying in, people getting impatient, and me moving as fast as I could behind the register. End of my shift, I clocked out, grabbed my bag, and was about to head home when Mark stopped me. "Hey, Jordan, hold up." I turned around, already exhausted. "Yeah." He crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "We got a problem. Money's missing from the register." My stomach dropped. I frowned. "Missing? How much?" "Almost $3,000. His eyes locked onto mine, like he was daring me to react the wrong way. I let out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because the whole thing was ridiculous. $3,000? Mark, I don't even touch the money except to give people change. His face stayed stone cold. Security footage shows you at the register. I took a step back, my pulse quickening. Of course it does. I worked the register. That doesn't mean I stole anything. But the way he looked at me told me that in his mind, it was already decided. The cops showed up 10 minutes later. I didn't even have time to process what was happening before I was being pulled into a squad car, hands cupped behind my back. My coworkers, people I'd worked with for over a year, just stood there, whispering, watching like they were seeing me for the first time. Like I wasn't Jordan anymore. Like I was just another story they'd hear on the news. At the station, they questioned me for hours. I told them the truth. I didn't steal anything. I didn't even know the money was missing until Mark told me. But they had evidence, grainy footage of me at the register, my login credentials showing I'd accessed it. Never mind the fact that Mark also had access. Never mind that he was the one who handled all the cash drops at the end of the night. None of that mattered. They charged me with grand larceny. And the worst part? The judge I was assigned to, Judge Richard Calloway, was known for one thing: making sure people like me never got a second chance. Sitting in that courtroom felt like being buried alive. The air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. Maybe tension, maybe inevitability. The wooden benches, the high ceiling, the cold stare of the bailiff standing near the door, all felt designed to make me feel small. Like the whole place had already decided my fate before I even opened my mouth. And at the center of it all sat Judge Richard Calloway. He looked exactly how I imagined a man like him would. Mid-50s, silver hair combed back, a sharp jaw that never seemed to unclench, and deep-set eyes that held the kind of authority that didn't need to be earned. It had been given to him, inherited like an old watch passed down through generations, and he used it like a weapon. I'd done my research. Law school had taught me that much. Calloway had a reputation, the kind that never made the news but was well known in the black community. If you were a young black man standing in his courtroom, you were already guilty. The only thing left to decide was how long he was going to make you suffer. I could see it in his eyes the moment I was brought in. He had already made up his mind. The prosecutor, a guy named Michael Denton, wasted no time. He painted me as a desperate young man with financial troubles, a student drowning in debt, looking for an easy way out. He had the security footage, the register logs, and even a statement from Mark Sullivan, my manager, claiming that I was the only one who could have taken the money. I clenched my fists under the table. That liar, my public defender, a woman named Lisa Monroe, was barely trying. She looked overworked, underpaid, and completely uninterested in whether I walked free or got buried under the jail. She asked a few weak questions, barely objected, and let the prosecution run the show. I realized right then, if I let her handle this case, I was done. So I made a decision that changed everything. When Calloway asked if I wanted to proceed with my assigned counsel, I stood up. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. Your Honor, I'd like to represent myself. For the first time since I walked into that courtroom, Calloway looked surprised. Lisa turned to me, whispering, "Are you sure? This isn't..." "I'm sure," I cut in. Calloway leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was some kind of anomaly. "You're telling me you'd rather defend yourself than have an experienced attorney do it for you?" "With all due respect, Your Honor," I said, keeping my tone polite but firm, "I don't believe my attorney has my best interests at heart. I'm a law student. I know my rights, and I know that I'm innocent." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Then Calloway smirked, a slow, condescending curve of his lips. "If you want to dig your own grave, be my guest," he said. He thought I was walking into a trap. He had no idea who he was dealing with. If Calloway thought I was some clueless kid about to fumble his way through a courtroom, he had another thing coming. I knew the law. I'd spent years studying cases, dissecting arguments, learning how the system worked, and more importantly, how it was rigged against people like me. This wasn't just about proving my innocence. It was about making sure they couldn't bury me alive in a system designed to break men like me before they even had a chance to fight. So when I stood up that first day, facing a jury that barely looked at me, a prosecutor grinning like he already had me convicted, and a judge who would rather see me in cuffs than in a classroom, I did the one thing they didn't expect. I stayed calm. "Your Honor," I began, keeping my voice steady. "Before we proceed, I'd like to file a motion to dismiss based on insufficient evidence." Calloway's smirk deepened. "On what grounds?" I turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Denton, you claim that I stole $3,000 from Grayson's diner, correct?" Denton gave me a condescending look, as if amused that I was even trying. "That's right. And your entire case is based on two pieces of evidence. Security footage showing me at the register and login records proving I accessed it." Denton nodded. "Yes." I took a step toward the jury box, making sure to meet their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you a question. If you walk into a bank and withdraw money from your account, does that mean you robbed the bank?" A few of them shifted uncomfortably. "No," I continued, "because withdrawing money is something you're supposed to do at a bank. Just like I was supposed to be at the register. It was my job." I turned back to Denton. "Do you have any footage of me taking money out of the register and putting it into my pockets?" He hesitated. "Not exactly, but..." "No," I cut in. "You don't." I turned to Calloway. "Your Honor, there is no direct evidence of theft. Only the fact that I was doing my job. Without a single frame of me stealing money, without a cash count showing an actual discrepancy at the time of my shift, this case should be dismissed." The room was silent for a moment. Then Calloway let out a low chuckle. "Nice try, Mr. Carter, but the motion is denied. We proceed to trial." Of course, he wasn't going to make it that easy. I clenched my jaw but nodded. "Fine. If he wanted to fight, I'd give him one." Denton smirked, thinking he'd won this round. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just here to defend myself. I was here to expose the truth. And I had a plan. If there's one thing I learned in law school, it's that the truth doesn't win cases. Proof does. I wasn't just fighting for my freedom. I was fighting against a system that wanted me to fail. Denton thought he had an airtight case. Calloway was already picturing me in an orange jumpsuit. But they had no idea that I had spent the last 3 nights in a jail cell preparing for this moment, going over every detail, every angle, every weakness in their case. And I found one. Actually, I found several. When the trial resumed the next morning, I walked in with a confidence that made Denton sit up a little straighter. He could tell something was different. The jury, the judge, even the stenographer, they all expected me to be scrambling, desperate. But I wasn't. I was ready. Denton called Mark Sullivan to the stand. I watched as he swaggered up, acting like he had already won. He was wearing his usual smug expression, but I could see the nervous twitch in his fingers. He wasn't expecting to be questioned by someone who actually knew the law. Denton started his questioning. "Mr. Sullivan, can you confirm that the defendant was working the register on the night of the theft?" "Yes, he was," Mark said, nodding. "And you personally reviewed the footage that night?" "I did." "And what did you see?" Mark turned to the jury, speaking slowly, like he was making sure they could all follow along. "I saw Jordan at the register. I saw him accessing the cash drawer multiple times, and at the end of the night, the money was missing." Denton folded his hands, looking satisfied. No further questions. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked toward the witness stand. "Mr. Sullivan, you just stated that I was at the register that night. Is that correct?" "Yes." and that I accessed the cash drawer multiple times. Correct. I nodded. Now, you said that at the end of the night, the money was missing. Did you personally count the cash? Mark hesitated, just for a second. No, the morning crew did. So, to be clear, you're saying the money wasn't discovered missing until the next day? That's right. I took a slow step closer. So how? Exactly. Did you determine that the money went missing during my shift and not before or after? Mark shifted in his seat. Because you were the last one to use a register before closing. I tilted my head. Are you sure about that? He hesitated again. I mean, as far as I know, yes. I turned to the jury. Interesting, because according to these shift logs, I held up a printed document. The last person to access the register that night was you. The courtroom went dead silent. Mark blinked. That's not possible. Oh, but it is, I said smoothly, walking over to the evidence table. See, every transaction at Grayson's Diner is recorded under an employee's login credentials. And thanks to Discovery, I was able to obtain the login records from that night. Turns out, the last recorded cash drawer access wasn't under my credentials. I turned and locked eyes with him. It was under yours. Mark swallowed. His face turned red. Denton stood up. Objection. Overruled, Calloway said, his smirk fading. He was watching now. I turned back to Mark. Do you have an explanation for that? I must have been. I didn't let him finish. And isn't it true that managers, not employees, are responsible for cash deposits at the end of the night? Mark's mouth opened, then shut. I smiled. So if the money went missing, wouldn't it make a lot more sense that the person in charge of handling the deposits was responsible? Mark looked like he was about to pass out. Denton was frantically flipping through papers, searching for a way to recover, but it was too late. I had just ripped their entire case apart. The second the words left my mouth, I could feel the energy in the courtroom shift. Mark Sullivan had walked in thinking he was in control, that he could sit there, spin his lies, and watch me get dragged away in handcuffs. But now he was sweating. His jaw was clenched, his fingers twitching on the witness, stand like he wanted to bolt. I let the silence stretch. Let the jury see him squirm. Let them feel the weight of the moment. Then I spoke. Mr. Sullivan, I said, slow and deliberate. Would you like to explain why your login credentials were the last ones used to access the register? Mark licked his lips. I don't know. There must be some kind of mistake. A mistake? I raised an eyebrow. So you're saying the system just randomly assigned your credentials to a cash drawer access that happened after I left? Mark swallowed hard. I mean, maybe I cut him off. Maybe you what? He had nothing. Denton knew it, too. He looked like a man watching his case go up in flames, flipping through his notes like he could somehow rewrite reality if he just found the right page. But there was nothing he could do. So I pressed harder. You testified under oath that I was the last one to access the register, but the shift logs prove that's a lie. You also stated that the money was discovered missing in the morning, not at closing, which means it could have been taken by anyone who had access to the register after my shift ended. Mark's face was red now. And considering the only person who accessed the register after me was you, I have to ask, I took a step closer, keeping my voice calm, controlled. Where's the money, Mark? The courtroom exploded. Gasps, murmurs. A few jurors even turned to each other, wide-eyed. Mark gripped the edge of the witness stand, his knuckles white. I don't have to answer that. I smiled. Actually, you do. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to request a forensic audit of Mark Sullivan's personal and business accounts. Denton jumped up. Objection. On what grounds? I shot back. We have motive. We have access. We have evidence that contradicts his testimony. If I was on trial with far less than that, then surely we can take a closer look at the man who actually had control over the money. Calloway leaned back in his chair, staring at me for a long moment. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He didn't want to grant my request. That much was obvious. But even a judge like him couldn't ignore what just happened. Objection overruled, Calloway finally said, his voice tight. The audit is granted. Boom. I had him. Mark sank into his seat, his confidence completely shattered. He knew what that audit would find. Bank deposits, irregular spending, transactions he wouldn't be able to explain. Denton knew it, too. His case was dead. I had just done something they never expected. I flipped the script. And now, they were the ones trapped. Mark Sullivan looked like a man drowning in his own lies. His face was pale, his fingers twitching against the witness stand, as if he wanted to claw his way out of this mess. But there was no way out. Not anymore. The forensic audit was ordered immediately. Denton tried to object, tried to spin some weak argument about scope and unfounded accusations. But even Judge Calloway wasn't buying it. The moment those financial records came in, it was over. Because the money, it was in Mark's personal account. A series of deposits, all made within days of the theft. It didn't take a legal expert to put two and two together. By the time court resumed a week later, Denton had nothing left to argue. His star witness, the man who built the entire case against me, was now under criminal investigation, and I was about to walk out of there a free man. I stood in the courtroom, heart pounding, as the jury foreman rose to deliver the verdict. The jury, find the defendant, Jordan Carter. He paused. The air felt thick. My hands clenched at my sides. Not guilty. The words hit me like a shockwave. I exhaled slowly, absorbing them, letting them sink in. The tension in my chest, the pressure, the weight of weeks of fear and uncertainty, finally broke. I turned slightly, catching sight of Mark. He was frozen, staring at nothing, his whole world crumbling around him. Then I looked at Judge Calloway. For the first time, the arrogance in his eyes was gone. He didn't say a word, didn't even look at me as he banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. I stepped out of that courtroom a free man, but I wasn't the same man who had walked in. I had faced the system head-on. I had stood in front of a judge who wanted to see me fail. I had taken on a prosecutor who thought he had me cornered. I had gone up against a man who was willing to destroy my life just to save his own. And I had won, not because the system was fair, not because justice worked the way it was supposed to, but because I refused to be silent. Mark Sullivan was arrested 2 weeks later. The audit revealed he had been stealing from the diner for years, covering his tracks by blaming employees, most of them young black men like me. I wasn't his first victim, but I was his last. As for Judge Calloway, his career took a hit. The case drew media attention. A young black man defending himself against a biased system and winning? People started digging into Calloway's history, and it turned out I wasn't the only one who had been railroaded in his courtroom. He kept his job for now, but his reputation? Shattered. And me? I went back to law school. But this time, I wasn't just studying the system. I was coming for it. If this story resonated with you, share it with those who need to hear it. Let's start conversations that matter, and that will lead to change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of what we are capable of when we stand up for what is right.